San Francisco gleamed under the autumn sun, its skyline a jagged crown of glass and steel. From the penthouse of Grant Tower, Richard Grant surveyed the city like a king overlooking his domain. At 48, he was the embodiment of Silicon Valley's dream, a self-made billionaire, founder of Nexus Innovations, a tech conglomerate that powered everything from AI-driven healthcare to quantum computing. His face, chiseled and weathered, stared back from magazine covers, Forbes, Wired, Time, each heralding him as a visionary. Yet behind the polished veneer, Richard was a man adrift. Orphaned at 7, he'd clawed his way from foster homes to MIT, then to the pinnacle of wealth. But the higher he climbed, the lonelier the summit became. His penthouse, a sprawling maze of minimalist luxury, echoed with silence. No wife, no children, no family, only the hum of servers and the distant buzz of the city below. His social circle, venture capitalists, CEOs, politicians, offered handshakes, not warmth. At galas they toasted his success, but their eyes glinted with envy or calculation. Tonight, Richard stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching fog creep over the Golden Gate Bridge. The city's elite were gathering downstairs for Nexus's annual charity gala, a masquerade of philanthropy masking deal-making and power plays. He loathed these events, but they were necessary. Nexus's stock had dipped after a rival's smear campaign, and Richard needed to project strength. He adjusted his tie, slipped on a tailored blazer, and descended to the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tuxedos and gowns. Waiters glided through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne. A string quartet played Vivaldi, barely audible over the chatter of San Francisco's upper crust. Richard moved among them, shaking hands, flashing practiced smiles. Mayor Claudia Reyes praised his latest AI patent. A hedge fund manager pitched a merger. A socialite flirted, her diamond earrings catching the light. Richard nodded, deflected, and kept moving. But his mind wandered. He saw himself at 10, shivering in a Chicago alley, stealing bread from a dumpster. That boy still lived inside him, whispering that all this, the wealth, the power, was a fragile illusion. He excused himself, slipping out to the terrace for air. The city sprawled before him, its lights a constellation of ambition. And somewhere below, in the shadows, were those the world had forgotten. Eli Carter was 16, though he looked younger, his frame slight from years of hunger. His home was a tattered sleeping bag beneath the 4th Street Bridge, where the hum of traffic drowned out his thoughts. San Francisco's Tenderloin district was his world, a labyrinth of neon signs, pawn shops, and despair. By day, he scavenged bottles for cash. By night, he dodged dealers and cops. His mother had died when he was 9, his father a ghost he'd never known. Foster care had been a revolving door of neglect, so he'd run at 14, choosing the streets over cages. Tonight, Eli crouched by a stormwater drain, counting coins from a day's hustle. $3.12, enough for a burger, maybe. His stomach growled, but he tucked the coins away, saving for a bus ticket to anywhere else. A cold wind whipped through the underpass, tugging at his hoodie. He pulled it tighter, his fingers brushing the scar on his wrist, a reminder of a foster brother's knife. Headlights swept across the concrete as a sleek black Tesla pulled up on the embankment. Eli froze, instincts kicking in. Rich folks didn't stop here unless they wanted trouble, or something worse. He shrank into the shadows, watching as a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that screamed money. The man scanned the underpass, his gaze sharp, like he was searching for something. Eli's heart raced. He clutched a broken bottle, ready to bolt. But the man didn't approach. Instead, he knelt by a pile of cardboard where Old Man Pete, a local transient, usually slept. The man left a paper bag, food, maybe, and stood, his breath visible in the chilly air. Then his eyes locked on Eli's hiding spot. "Hey," the man called, his voice calm but firm. "I see you. I'm not here to hurt you." Eli didn't move. He'd heard that line before. The man took a step closer, hands raised, palms open. "You hungry? I've got sandwiches in the car." Eli's stomach betrayed him, growling loud, enough to hear. The man chuckled softly. Come on, no strings." Against his better judgment, Eli stepped forward, bottle still in hand. The man's face came into view. Strong jaw, graying temples, eyes that held a strange mix of authority and sadness. "I'm Richard," he said. "What's your name?" Eli hesitated. Names were power on the streets, but something in the man's tone, steady, unguarded, made him answer. "Eli," Richard nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Eli, you want to ride somewhere warm? Or just the sandwich?" Eli weighed his options. The guy could be a creep, but he didn't vibe like one. And the cold was biting harder now. "Sandwich," he said finally. Richard handed him a bag from the Tesla's trunk, roast beef on rye, an apple, a bottle of water. Eli tore into it, the bread soft and savory, the best thing he'd tasted in weeks. Richard leaned against the car, watching the city lights. "You been out here long?" he asked. Eli shrugged, mouth full. "Long enough." Richard didn't press. When Eli finished, he offered a card, simple, white, with just a name and number. "If you need anything, call me. I mean it." Eli took the card, skeptical. People didn't help for free. But Richard just got back in his car and drove off, leaving Eli alone with the hum of the bridge and a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Richard couldn't shake the boy's face. Eli's eyes, wary, defiant, yet achingly vulnerable, haunted him. He saw himself in them, a ghost of his own past. For days he buried himself in work, negotiating a $2 billion acquisition, but Eli lingered in his thoughts. He'd given out his card before, to veterans, to runaways, but none had called. He didn't expect this one to either. Then at 2 a.m. on a rainy Thursday, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Hello?" Richard answered, voice thick with sleep. "It's Eli." The boy's voice was small, almost drowned by the patter of rain. I need help. Where are you?" Richard was already pulling on a coat. "Mission Street, by the old theater. Some guys, they took my stuff. Stay put, I'm coming." Richard found him huddled under a marquee, soaked and shivering, a bruise blooming on his cheek. Eli's sleeping bag and coins were gone, stolen by a gang of street kids. Richard's jaw tightened. He'd seen this cruelty before, in alleys and foster homes. Without a word, he guided Eli to his car and drove to a diner on Van Ness Avenue. Over coffee and pancakes, Eli's story spilled out. A dead mother, an absent father, foster homes that felt like prisons. Richard listened, his heart heavy. When Eli finished, he looked down, bracing for pity or judgment. Instead, Richard said, "You're coming home with me." Eli blinked. "What? You heard me? I've got a spare room." "You can stay until we figure things out." Eli laughed, sharp and bitter. "You don't even know me, man. I could rob you blind." Richard met his gaze. "You could, but I don't think you will." It wasn't that simple, of course. Richard's lawyer, Margaret Chen, nearly had a stroke when he mentioned adoption. "You met him under a bridge, Richard. He could be a con artist." His board of directors whispered about optics, Nexus's CEO playing savior to a street rat. The tabloids had a field day, Billionaire's bizarre charity stunt. But Richard didn't care. He'd built an empire by trusting his gut, and his gut said Eli was worth saving. The adoption process was a gauntlet of background checks, psych evaluations, and court hearings. Eli, wary at first, softened as weeks turned to months. Richard's mansion in Pacific Heights became a haven, bookshelves stuffed with sci-fi novels, a game room with a vintage Pac-Man machine, a rooftop garden where they watched the stars. For the first time, Eli had a bed, a desk, a future. Eli thrived in ways Richard hadn't dared hope. Enrolled in a private academy, he devoured math and coding, his mind a sponge. Teachers raved about his aptitude, classmates envied his charisma. Richard hired tutors to fill the gaps in Eli's education, and soon the boy was debugging algorithms and debating philosophy over dinner. Richard, who'd never known family, felt a warmth he couldn't name. But the world wasn't kind. At galas, Silicon Valley's elites smiled thinly at Eli, their eyes appraising. Was he a prop? A project? Whispers followed. Richard's pet orphan. Eli felt it, the weight of being an outsider in a world of privilege. He hid his doubts behind a grin, but Richard saw the flicker of insecurity. One night, over chess in the study, Eli asked, "Why me?" "You could have picked anyone," Richard moved a pawn, considering. "Because you reminded me of someone I used to be, someone who needed a chance." Eli nodded, but his eyes were distant. Richard didn't press, but he sensed a crack forming, too small to see, yet too deep to ignore. By 18, Eli was a star. Stanford accepted him with a full scholarship, but he deferred to join Nexus as an intern. Richard beamed, introducing him to the board. "This is Eli Carter, my son." The word son felt like a victory, a defiance of fate. Eli, now tall and broad-shouldered, charmed investors with his wit and vision. Blogs called him the prodigy, Nexus's heir apparent. Yet beneath the surface, Eli wrestled with shadows. He had everything: money, education, a father who loved him. But it wasn't his, not really. He was a guest in Richard's world, a borrower of dreams. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, a voice whispering, "You'll never be enough." Nexus's headquarters buzzed with ambition. Glass-walled offices, holographic displays, coders hunched over laptops. Eli, now 20, strode through the atrium, a tablet in hand, pitching a new AI platform to a group of VCs. His suit was bespoke, his smile magnetic. The investors ate it up, signing a $500 million deal. Richard watched from his office, pride swelling. Eli was no longer the boy under the bridge. He was a force, but forces could be unpredictable. Eli's rise drew eyes, some admiring, others envious. Vanessa Klein, Nexus's CFO, saw him as a threat to her own ambitions. She cornered him at a board meeting, her voice honeyed but sharp. "You're doing well, Eli. Just don't forget who built this company." Eli's smile didn't waver. "I know exactly who built it, and who's going to take it further." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, but Eli was already moving on, shaking. Hands winning allies. He was good. Too good. Richard, distracted by a looming antitrust lawsuit, didn't see the storm brewing. Eli's charm masked a growing hunger, a need to prove he wasn't just Richard's shadow. Late one night, Eli sat in his office, scrolling through Nexus's financials. The numbers were staggering: billions in revenue, trillions in market cap. Yet every dollar traced back to Richard. Eli's name was nowhere. He leaned back, staring at the city skyline, the same view Richard had. A thought took root, small, but insidious. Why should it all be his? He opened a private browser and searched for Nexus's shareholders. Names, holdings, voting rights. He cross-referenced their public statements, their weaknesses. One liked yachts, another had a gambling problem. Eli's mind raced, piecing together a plan. Not yet, but soon. He'd waited long enough. Eli Carter stood at the edge of Nexus Innovations' rooftop garden, the San Francisco skyline glittering below like a sea of stars. At 22, he was no longer the scrawny kid from the Tenderloin. His frame had filled out, his features sharpened. High cheekbones, a jawline that caught the light, eyes that could charm or intimidate. In a tailored Navy suit, he looked every inch the heir to Richard Grant's empire. Tonight, Nexus was unveiling its latest AI platform, Aurora, at a gala in the Ferry Building, and Eli was the face of the launch. The atrium buzzed with tech moguls, senators and influencers, their champagne flutes clinking under LED chandeliers. A holographic display projected Aurora's capabilities: real-time language translation, predictive analytics, autonomous logistics. Eli took the stage, his voice smooth as silk, weaving a vision of a connected future. "Nexus isn't just building technology," he said, pausing for effect. "We're building trust." The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing. Blogs were already calling him Silicon Valley's golden boy. Richard watched from the sidelines, pride warring with unease. Eli's charisma was undeniable, but there was a new edge to him, a hunger that went beyond ambition. Richard had groomed him to lead, but lately, Eli's decisions felt less like collaboration and more like power. Blaze. He'd pushed for aggressive acquisitions, overruled senior executives, even sidelined Vanessa Klein, the CFO, in budget meetings. Vanessa's icy glares hadn't gone unnoticed. After the gala, Richard pulled Eli aside in a quiet lounge overlooking the bay. "You were phenomenal out there," he said, clapping Eli's shoulder. "But slow down. You're burning bridges you might need later." Eli's smile was tight. "I'm just doing what you taught me, Richard. Seize the moment." Richard studied him, searching for the boy he'd found under the bridge. "There's a difference between seizing and forcing. Trust takes time." Eli nodded, but his eyes flicked to the skyline, distant and unreadable. Richard let it go, chalking it up to youth. He had bigger problems, an antitrust lawsuit from the Department of Justice accusing Nexus of monopolistic practices. The legal battle was draining millions, and whispers of a hostile takeover circled like vultures. Richard needed Eli focused, not chasing glory. But Eli was chasing something else entirely. In his corner office late at night, he pored over Nexus's shareholder registry, cross-referencing names with leverage points. He'd already won over 2 key investors: Carl Whitaker, a venture capitalist with a yacht addiction, and Priya Sharma, a hedge fund manager facing a tax evasion probe. Eli had promised Whitaker a stake in a new offshore venture. Sharma got discreet legal help. Both pledged their votes in any boardroom showdown. Eli's plan was simple but ruthless: control enough shares to challenge Richard's authority. He didn't want to destroy Nexus, just claim it. Richard had given him everything, but it wasn't enough. Eli needed to own it, to prove he wasn't a charity case. The voice in his head, the one that had whispered doubts since he was 16, was louder now. "You're nothing without him. Take what's yours." Eli's double life demanded precision. By day, he was the dutiful son, presenting quarterly reports, dining with Richard at their Pacific Heights mansion. By night, he worked in shadows, meeting contacts in dive bars and encrypted chat rooms. He hired a private investigator, Lena Torres, to dig into Nexus's financials, searching for dirt on Richard. Lena, a former FBI agent with a knack for discretion, delivered a trail of offshore accounts tied to Nexus's early days. The transactions were legal but murky, perfect for spinning a scandal. Eli fed the information to a tech blogger, Cypher, known for anonymous exposés. The post went viral. Nexus CEO's secret slush fund? The stock dipped 8% overnight. Richard, blindsided, called an emergency board meeting. "This is nonsense," he said, slamming the blog printout on the table. "Those accounts were for R&D, fully audited." Vanessa Klein leaned forward, her voice dripping with concern. "The optics are terrible, Richard. Investors are spooked." Eli stayed silent, his face a mask of neutrality. Inside, he was exhilarated. The board's faith in Richard was cracking just as he'd planned. But the game wasn't without risks. Lena, the PI, grew curious. "You're paying me to bury your dad," she said over coffee in Oakland. "What's your endgame, kid?" Eli's jaw tightened. "He's not my dad, and you're paid to dig, not ask questions." Lena smirked, but backed off. Eli couldn't afford loose ends. He doubled her fee, ensuring her silence. For now. At home, Richard sensed the shift. Eli was late for dinners, evasive in conversations. One evening, over steak and Bordeaux, Richard tried to bridge the gap. "You seem distracted, Eli. Something on your mind?" Eli swirled his wine, avoiding Richard's gaze. "Just work. Aurora's." "Rollout is intense," Richard nodded, but the lie hung heavy. He remembered his own youth, the hunger to prove himself. He wanted to trust Eli, to believe their bond was unbreakable, but doubt gnawed at him, a shadow he couldn't shake. Eli's plan accelerated. He courted more shareholders, exploiting their greed or fear. He fabricated documents, forged emails suggesting Richard had siphoned funds for personal use. The emails were subtle, planted in Nexus's servers by a hacker Eli hired through the dark web. When the time came, they'd surface as evidence of Richard's misconduct. Eli also weaponized the media. He leaked stories to the Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch, framing Richard as out of touch, a relic clinging to power. Headlines screamed, "Is Richard Grant losing his grip?" Public sentiment turned, fueled by social media bots Eli paid to amplify the noise. On X, Nexus Crisis trended, with users speculating about Richard's downfall. Vanessa Klein, sensing opportunity, allied with Eli. She'd always resented Richard's dominance, and Eli's ambition was her ticket to influence. In a private meeting at her Nob Hill condo, she laid out her terms. "I'll back you in the boardroom," she said, sipping gin, "but I want COO when you're CEO." Eli extended a hand. "Deal." The final piece was the antitrust lawsuit. Eli met secretly with a DOJ attorney, feeding her doctored data that painted Nexus as a predatory monopoly. The attorney, ambitious and unaware of the manipulation, pushed for harsher penalties. The lawsuit's pressure would weaken Richard's defenses, making the boardroom coup easier. Eli's nights grew sleepless, his conscience a battleground. He saw Richard's face in his dreams, the man who'd saved him, fed him, loved him. But the voice in his head drowned out guilt. "He made you a pawn, now you're the king." Eli buried his doubts, focusing on the prize. Nexus was his birthright, earned through years of proving himself. Richard had to fall. The board meeting was set for a stormy Tuesday in November, rain lashing the windows of Nexus's headquarters. The agenda was routine: Q4 projections, Aurora updates, but Eli had rigged the stage for a massacre. He'd spent weeks securing votes, planting evidence, and stoking distrust. The board, a mix of old money investors and tech disruptors, was primed for rebellion. Richard entered the conference room, his face haggard from months of legal battles. The DOJ had frozen Nexus's assets, and the media frenzy hadn't let up. He took his seat at the head of the table, unaware of the trap. Vanessa opened the meeting, her tone grave. "We need to address the elephant in the room. Richard, the allegations of financial misconduct are crippling us." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Allegations, Vanessa, not facts. I've shared every audit with this board." Carl Whitaker, the yacht-loving VC, cleared his throat. "The emails we found suggest otherwise. Transfers to unlisted accounts dated 2010. Richard's head snapped up. "What emails?" Eli stood, his voice steady but laced with feigned regret. "I didn't want to believe it, Richard, but I found them in the archives, transfers totaling $50 million unmarked. The board deserves answers." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard stared at Eli, betrayal dawning. "You found them?" Eli met his gaze, unflinching. "It's my job to protect this company." The forged emails were projected on the screen, their timestamps and signatures flawless. Richard's protests about context about audits were drowned by the board's outrage. Priya Sharma, the hedge fund manager, delivered the killing blow. "We've lost confidence in your leadership, Richard. I move for a vote of no confidence." The vote was swift, brutal. 8-3, Richard was out. Eli, nominated by Vanessa, was named interim CEO. The room fell silent as Richard stood, his chair scraping the floor. He looked at Eli, not with anger, but with a sorrow that cut deeper than rage. "You've learned well," Richard said softly. "Maybe too well." He walked out, the rain swallowing his footsteps. Eli sat in the CEO's chair, the weight of victory hollow. The board clapped, but their eyes were already calculating. Eli was king, but kings could fall. The news broke like wildfire. CNBC: Nexus ousts founder in shocking coup. Bloomberg: Eli Carter, from orphan to CEO. X exploded with memes and hot takes, some hailing Eli as a visionary, others calling him a backstabber. Nexus's stock soared 12%, investors thrilled by the shakeup. Eli, now 23, was the youngest CEO in Silicon Valley history, but the crown was heavy. Eli moved into Richard's old office, its panoramic views a constant reminder of his betrayal. He threw himself into work, pushing Aurora to market, acquiring startups, doubling Nexus's valuation. The world saw a titan. Eli saw a fraud. At night, he drank alone, haunted by Richard's final words. "You've learned well." Richard vanished from the public eye. Paparazzi stalked his mansion, but he'd left for a cabin in Mendocino County, a world away from San Francisco's clamor. He lived simply, chopping wood, reading Thoreau, ignoring the headlines. Friends urged him to fight, to sue, to expose Eli, but Richard refused. "He's my son," he told Margaret Chen over the phone. "I won't destroy him." Eli, meanwhile, faced new enemies. Vanessa, now COO, maneuvered for more power, whispering to shareholders about Eli's inexperience. Lena, the PI, resurfaced, hinting she'd kept copies of their dealings. The DOJ lawsuit lingered, a noose tightening. Eli's empire, built on lies, teetered. One night, unable to sleep, Eli drove to the 4th Street Bridge, where Richard had found him years ago. The underpass was unchanged, graffiti, trash, the hum of traffic. He stood where he'd once hidden, a broken bottle in hand. The boy he'd been felt so far away, yet so close. He wondered if Richard had been right, if trust, not power, was the real currency. The Mendocino coast was a world apart from San Francisco's frenetic pulse. Jagged cliffs plunged into the Pacific, their edges softened by mist. Richard Grant's cabin sat perched on a bluff, a weathered cedar structure with a tin roof that sang in the rain. At 49, he was a ghost of the titan who'd once ruled Silicon Valley. His hair, once neatly trimmed, now curled at the collar, streaked with silver. His hands, calloused from chopping firewood, bore no trace of the boardroom's polish. Yet his eyes, though weary, held a quiet clarity. Richard's days followed a simple rhythm. Dawn hikes through redwood groves, afternoons reading, Camus, Steinbeck, anything to quiet his mind. Evenings were spent by the fire, a glass of whiskey in hand, the ocean's roar his only companion. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, no TV, he'd sold. His Tesla traded his Rolex for a second-hand Timex. The world moved on without him, and he let it. News of Nexus reached him in fragments, carried by the occasional visitor. Margaret Chen, his lawyer, drove up once a month, her Mercedes incongruous on the dirt road. "Eli's running the show," she'd say, her tone clipped. "Stock's up, but the DOJ's circling. He's in over his head." Richard would nod, staring at the horizon. He didn't ask for details. The boy he'd raised was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. But Richard wasn't at peace. At night, memories clawed at him. Eli's laugh over chess, their stargazing on the mansion's roof, the moment he'd signed the adoption papers. He'd saved Eli from the streets, but not from himself. The betrayal stung, not for the loss of Nexus, but for the loss of trust. Richard had built an empire on calculated risks, yet his greatest gamble, loving Eli, had cost him everything. One stormy afternoon, as rain battered the cabin, a package arrived. No return address, just a manila envelope stuffed with documents. Richard opened it, his breath catching. Bank statements, emails, server logs, all tracing the forged evidence Eli had used to oust him. A handwritten note was tucked inside. "You deserve the truth." Lena Torres, the PI Eli had hired. Richard's jaw tightened. He burned the papers in the fireplace, watching the lies curl into ash. Revenge tempted him, but he pushed it away. Eli was his son, blood or not. Some bonds, even broken, held fast. In San Francisco, Eli Carter reigned supreme, but his throne was built on sand. At 23, he was Nexus's CEO, a billionaire before his first gray hair. His face graced Fortune's cover, captioned, "The Future of Tech." He lived in Richard's old Pacific Heights mansion, its rooms now filled with art he didn't understand and parties he didn't enjoy. His days were a blur of board meetings, product launches, and interviews, each move calculated to cement his legacy. Nexus thrived under Eli's ruthless efficiency. Aurora dominated the AI market, crushing competitors. He acquired a quantum computing startup for $3 billion as a move analysts called audacious. Investors adored him, employees feared him. But cracks were forming. The DOJ's antitrust lawsuit loomed, threatening to dismantle Nexus. Shareholders whispered about Eli's youth, his lack of seasoning. Vanessa Klein, now COO, was a constant thorn, her smiles masking ambition. "You're doing great, Eli," she'd say, her eyes cold. "Just watch your back." Eli's nights were worse. Sleep eluded him, his mind replaying the boardroom coup. Richard's sorrowful gaze haunted him, a ghost he couldn't banish. He drank scotch to dull the guilt, but it only sharpened his paranoia. Had Lena betrayed him? Was Vanessa plotting? The forged emails buried in Nexus's servers felt like ticking bombs. He hired a cybersecurity firm to scrub them, but the hacker he'd used was untraceable, a loose end he couldn't tie. His only solace was power. Eli leaned into it, wielding Nexus like a weapon. He fired dissenters, bullied regulators, and charmed the media with his rags-to-riches tale. On X, he was a folk hero, Cephtus from streets to suites trending globally, but mirrors were his enemy. In them he saw a stranger, sharp suit, hollow eyes, a boy pretending to be a king. One evening, at a gala in the Palace of Fine Arts, Eli overheard a tech journalist whisper, "He's Richard's shadow, just shinier." The words cut deeper than he'd expected. He excused himself, retreating to the lagoon's edge, the city's lights reflecting on the water. For a moment he was 16 again, under the 4th Street Bridge, clutching a broken bottle. Back then, he'd had nothing but hunger. Now he had everything, and it felt the same. Eli's empire began to fray. Lena Torres resurfaced, not with threats, but with silence, a dangerous kind. She'd vanished from Oakland, her office shuttered. Eli's calls went unanswered, his emails bounced. He hired a new PI to track her, but the trail was cold. Panic gnawed at him. Lena knew too much, the forged emails, the shareholder bribes, the DOJ leaks. If she talked, he was finished. Vanessa, sensing weakness, tightened her grip. She rallied. Board members, framing Eli's aggressive acquisitions as reckless. "He's gambling with our future," she told Carl Whitaker over lunch at the slanted door. Carl, still loyal to Eli's promises, wavered but didn't commit. Vanessa didn't need his vote yet. She was planting seeds. The DOJ struck next. A federal judge ordered Nexus to divest its cloud division, a $20 billion asset. The stock plummeted 15%. Eli faced the press, his charm strained. "We'll fight this," he vowed, but his voice lacked conviction. On X, Gaku's Nexus downtrended, with users mocking his fall. From orphan to overlord to overrated, one post read, racking up millions of likes. Eli's guilt festered into obsession. He hired a team to monitor Richard, expecting a lawsuit or expose. Instead, reports came back of a man living quietly, chopping wood, reading by lamplight. Richard's silence was worse than anger. It was judgment. Eli drank more, slept less. His dreams were vivid now. Richard under the bridge offering a sandwich, Eli stabbing him with the broken bottle. He'd wake sweating, the mansion's silence deafening. One night, desperate for clarity, Eli drove to Stanford, where he'd once deferred his admission. He wandered the quad, the red-tiled roofs glowing under moonlight. A professor recognized him, an old mentor who'd taught him coding. "You look lost, Eli," she said gently. "Success isn't a place. It's a choice." Eli wanted to confess, to her, to Richard, to the world. But the voice in his head, the one that had driven him to betray, hissed, "You're too far gone. Keep going." He thanked the professor and left, the weight of his choices heavier than ever. Eli couldn't avoid it any longer. He needed to face Richard, to prove he'd won, to silence the guilt. He found the cabin's address in Margaret Chen's files, buried in a legal memo. On a crisp December morning, he drove north, the city, fading into rolling hills. The Pacific sparkled to his left, indifferent to his turmoil. The cabin was smaller than he'd imagined, its chimney puffing smoke. Richard was outside, splitting logs, his flannel shirt damp with sweat. He looked up as Eli's Porsche crunched onto the gravel, his expression unreadable. Eli stepped out, his designer coat out of place against the wild landscape. "Eli," Richard said, setting down the axe. His voice was steady, not warm, but not cold. "What brings you here?" Eli had rehearsed a speech, triumphant, defiant, but it crumbled under Richard's gaze. "I wanted to see you," he said, the words lame. "To check in?" Richard gestured to the porch, where 2 Adirondack chairs faced the ocean. They sat, the silence heavy. Waves crashed below, gulls wheeled overhead. Eli's hands twitched. itching for a drink, a phone, anything to distract him. "You got what you wanted," Richard said finally. "Nexus, the title, the headlines. How's it feel?" Eli forced a smile. "Pretty good. Stock's up. Aurora's killing it. You'd be proud." Richard's eyes, sharp as ever, cut through the lie. "Proud? I was proud when you fixed your first bug, when you aced your SATs. This?" He waved a hand encompassing Eli's empire. "This is just noise." Eli's chest tightened. "I did what I had to. You built Nexus, but I made it better, stronger." Richard leaned forward, his voice low, resonant. "You didn't make it stronger. You broke it. You broke us. And for what? A corner office? A cover story?" Eli stood, pacing the porch, anger flaring. "You don't get it. I was nothing before you. A street kid, invisible. You gave me a shot, but it was never mine. I had to take it." Richard watched him, sorrow etching his face. "I gave you more than a shot, Eli. I gave you a home, a name, love. But you couldn't trust it. You still think you're that kid under the bridge, fighting for scraps." Eli's throat burned. He wanted to scream, to hit something, to make Richard understand. But the truth in Richard's words was a blade, cutting deep. "I'm not that kid anymore," he said, voice breaking. "I'm CEO. I'm somebody." Richard stood, closing the distance between them. "You're my son," he said softly. "I don't regret saving you. I only regret I couldn't save your soul." The words landed like a blow. Eli staggered back, tears pricking his eyes. He wanted to apologize, to beg forgiveness, but pride choked him. Instead, he turned and walked to his car, the gravel crunching under his boots. Richard didn't call after him. The cabin door closed, a quiet finality. Eli drove back to San Francisco, the ocean blurring through his tears. Richard's words echoed, a relentless drumbeat. "I couldn't save your soul." He blasted music to drown them out, but they clung like damp fog. By the time he reached the mansion, night had fallen, the city's lights a mocking reminder of his victory. He poured a scotch, then another, pacing the marble floors. The mansion felt like a mausoleum, its grandeur a lie. He avoided the study, where he and Richard had played chess, but memories stalked him. Eli's empire was crumbling, not from lawsuits or rivals, but from within. He'd won everything, yet lost himself. Vanessa called, her voice urgent. "The board's meeting tomorrow. Whitaker's flipping. We need to talk strategy." Eli hung. Up, too tired to care. Lena was still out there, a shadow waiting to strike. The DOJ's ruling loomed, but none of it mattered. He wandered to the master bathroom, its gold fixtures gleaming under LED lights. He faced the mirror, searching for the man he'd become. The reflection was a stranger. Sharp cheekbones, bloodshot eyes, a mouth twisted with regret. Eli touched the glass as if he could reach the boy he'd been, hungry, scared, but whole. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The mirror didn't answer. Outside, San Francisco glittered, indifferent. Eli sank to the floor, the scotch bottle clattering. He'd climbed to the top, but the view was empty. Eli Carter stood at the pinnacle of Nexus innovations, but the ground beneath him was crumbling. At 23, he was Silicon Valley's wunderkind, his face plastered across billboards, his name synonymous with innovation. Yet, as he stared out from his office in Grant Tower, the San Francisco skyline felt like a cage. The confrontation with Richard in Mendocino had cracked something inside him, a fault line widening with every sleepless night. Nexus was under siege. The DOJ's antitrust ruling had forced the sale of its cloud division, slashing the company's valuation by a third. The stock market reeled and investors, once Eli's cheerleaders, grew restless. On X, Nexus collapse trended, with posts dissecting his every move. "Golden boy or grifter?" one viral thread asked, amassing millions of views. Eli's PR team worked overtime, but the narrative was slipping from his control. Vanessa Klein, the COO, smelled blood. She'd been biding her time, cultivating allies on the board. At a tense strategy session in Nexus's glass-walled conference room, she struck. "Eli, your acquisitions are bleeding us dry," she said, her voice smooth as a blade. "The board's questioning your judgment." Eli leaned back, his smile a mask. "The board trusted me when we hit $3 trillion. They'll trust me now." Carl Whitaker, the yacht-obsessed VC, shifted uncomfortably. "That was before the DOJ gutted us. We need stability, not gambles." Eli's pulse quickened. He'd bought Carl's loyalty with promises of offshore deals, but loyalty was a fickle currency. Vanessa's eyes gleamed. She was orchestrating a coup, just as Eli had done to Richard. The irony wasn't lost on him. Lena Torres, the PI, remained a ghost. Eli's new investigator reported she'd left California, possibly for Mexico, but her silence was louder than any threat. She held the keys to his downfall, proof of the forged emails, the shareholder bribes, the DOJ leaks. Eli doubled security, installed spyware on his devices, and slept with a loaded pistol in his nightstand. Paranoia was his new companion, whispering that every shadow hid a blade. At night, Eli wandered the Pacific Heights mansion, its opulence mocking him. He avoided the study where Richard's chessboard still sat, a knight toppled as if in surrender. Eli drank to numb the guilt, but Richard's words haunted him. "I only regret I couldn't save your soul." He'd won everything, power, wealth, fame, but it was ash in his mouth. The board meeting loomed like a guillotine. Vanessa had rallied enough votes to challenge Eli's leadership, framing him as a reckless upstart. Eli prepared furiously, drafting counter-proposals, calling in favors. He met Priya Sharma, the hedge fund manager, at a discreet bar in Soma. "I need you to hold the line," he told her, sliding a folder across the table. "Details of a new AI patent, a bribe disguised." "As opportunity," Priya's eyes flickered with greed, but her voice was cautious. "Vanessa's offering more, Eli, and she's got Whitaker." Eli's stomach sank. "Name your price." She leaned closer. "A board seat, and immunity if this blows up." Eli nodded, hating himself. Every deal was a shackle, binding him to a throne he no longer wanted. He left the bar, the city's neon glow blurring through his exhaustion. He drove aimlessly, ending up at the 4th Street Bridge, where Richard had found him 7 years ago. The underpass was unchanged, graffiti smeared, littered with trash. Eli parked and stepped out, the cold biting through his coat. He imagined himself at 16, clutching a broken bottle, hungry and free. That boy had been a survivor, not a schemer. Where had he gone? A figure emerged from the shadows, an old man bundled in rags, pushing a cart. Eli recognized him. Old Man Pete, the transient Richard had left food for all those years ago. Pete squinted, his voice raspy. "You that kid from the bridge, ain't?" "Yeah, the one the rich guy took." Eli's throat tightened. "Yeah, that's me." Pete chuckled, toothless. "Heard you're a big shot now." "Don't look so big to me." Eli forced a laugh, but Pete's words stung. He handed the old man a $100 bill, then drove away, the bridge fading in his rear view. He didn't belong there anymore, but he didn't belong in Nexus either. He was nowhere, a king without a kingdom. Lena Torres returned like a storm. Eli was in his office reviewing Aurora's Q1 projections when an encrypted email arrived. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line chilled him. "You can't outrun the truth." Attached was a zip file, screenshots of the forged emails, recordings of his calls with the hacker, bank transfers to Cypher's account. A note followed. "Meet me at Pier 39, midnight. Come alone, or this goes public." Eli's hands shook. Lena had played him, biding her time for maximum leverage. He considered running, Zurich, Dubai, anywhere, but his empire was here, fragile and bleeding. He had to face her. Pier 39 was a tourist trap by day, but at midnight it was a ghost town, the carousel dark, the sea lion's barks echoing. Eli arrived in a hoodie and jeans, his pistol tucked in his waistband. Lena waited by the waters. Edge, her leather jacket blending with the night. She was older than he remembered, her eyes hard but weary. "You've been busy," she said, tossing a USB drive at him. "That's a copy. The originals are safe. For now." Eli caught the drive, his voice steady despite his fear. "What do you want?" Lena smirked. You think it's money? I'm not that cheap. I want you to come clean. Tell the board, the press, Richard. Own what you did, Eli laughed, bitter. You think I'd torch everything I've built? You already have, she said. Look at you. You're a wreck. That empire's a lie, and you know it. Eli's hand twitched toward the gun, but Lena's gaze stopped him. Don't, she said softly. You're not a killer. You're just lost. She walked away, leaving Eli with the USB drive and a choice. He drove home, the city a blur. In the mansion he played the recordings, his own voice damning him. Lena was right. He'd built a lie, and it was collapsing. But confession meant ruin. He poured a scotch, then smashed the glass against the wall, the shards glittering like his fractured dreams. The board meeting was a battlefield. Vanessa opened with a motion to remove Eli as CEO, citing strategic missteps and the DOJ's fallout. Whitaker and Sharma, swayed by Vanessa's promises, backed her. Eli stood, his voice calm but laced with steel. You want stability? I've doubled our valuation in 2 years. Vanessa's offering stagnation. I'm offering the future. He projected Aurora's latest metrics, dazzling even the skeptics. For a moment he had them. His charm, his vision, the old magic. But Vanessa countered with a bombshell. We've received evidence of financial irregularities, she said, holding up a dossier. Eli's been manipulating data to inflate our numbers. The room gasped. Eli's heart stopped. Lena hadn't gone public. She'd sold him out to Vanessa. Or had she? The dossier's details were vague, but the accusation was enough. The board voted, 6-5. Eli was out, Vanessa named interim CEO. He left the room, the silence deafening, his empire dust. Eli didn't fight. He packed a single bag and left. The mansion. The paparazzi swarming. He checked into a nondescript hotel in the Mission District, its neon sign flickering. There, alone, he made a call. Margaret, he said, his voice raw, I need to see Richard. One last time. Richard's cabin hadn't changed, but Eli had. He arrived at dusk, his Porsche traded for a rental sedan, his suit replaced by jeans and a hoodie. Richard was on the porch, carving a piece of driftwood, the ocean a silver sheen behind him. He looked up, unsurprised, as if he'd been waiting. Eli, he said, setting the knife down. You look like hell. Eli laughed, a broken sound. Feel like it too. They sat, the same chairs, the same view. Eli told him everything. The forgeries, the bribes, Lena's betrayal, Vanessa's coup. The words poured out, a confession and a plea. I thought I needed to be you, he said, tears streaming. But I lost me. Richard listened, his face unreadable. When Eli finished, he leaned back, the stars emerging above. You didn't need to be me, he said. You needed to be Eli. The boy I saw under the bridge, he was enough. Eli sobbed, the weight of years collapsing. I'm sorry, Richard, for everything. Richard's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. I forgave you a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't fix what's broken. That's on you. Eli nodded, the truth a bitter medicine. They sat in silence, the waves a steady pulse. 4. The first time in years Eli felt a flicker of peace, not absolution, but possibility. Eli didn't return to Nexus. He left San Francisco renting a small apartment in Portland, where the rain and anonymity suited him. He worked remotely as a coder, his name a footnote in tech history. Nexus, under Vanessa, stabilized but never soared. The DOJ case dragged on, a shadow over Silicon Valley. Lena surfaced briefly, publishing a cryptic blog post about truth in the shadows, then vanished again. Richard stayed in Mendocino, his life simple, his heart scarred but whole. Eli's nights were still restless, but the dreams had changed. No more bridges or bottles, just a mirror, reflecting a man he was learning to know. One evening he stood before his bathroom mirror, its edges chipped, the glass fogged. He traced his reflection, the sharp cheekbones softer now, the eyes less haunted. Who are you? He asked, as he had in San Francisco. This time, the mirror answered, not with words but with a feeling. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Eli smiled, small and tentative. He wasn't the boy from the bridge, nor the king of Nexus. He was something. New, unfinished, human. The story ended there, in Portland's quiet rain, with Eli facing himself, the future unwritten.